I liked it all right, but I had to get out and earn a little bread. I had to get out and earn a living. Oh, what do I remember most about my childhood?
Remember Steve McQueen? He was the face of rebellion in Hollywood and lived life on his own terms. But behind the fame, there was a side to McQueen that few ever saw, especially in his final days. What really happened to the king of cool when the cameras stopped rolling? How did a man who seemed invincible face the one thing he couldn't outrun? Join us as we uncover the heartbreaking truth about Steve McQueen's final days. A rough start. Steve McQueen's life didn't begin with fame, success, or fast cars. It started in a broken home filled with pain, confusion, and constant change. Born on March 24, 1930 in Beech Grove, Indiana, Terrence Stephen McQueen came into a world that wasn't ready to care for him. His childhood would shape much of the toughness and edge that audiences later saw on screen. Steve's father, William McQueen, was a barnstorming stunt pilot, daring in the air but completely unreliable on the ground. He left the family when Steve was just a few months old. That abandonment stayed with Steve for the rest of his life. His mother, Julia Ann, was only 19 when he was born. She struggled emotionally and financially. She moved around frequently and had trouble holding her life together. Over the years, she would marry several times, and none of those men offered young Steve the love or safety he needed. By the time he was a toddler, his mother had already given up trying to raise him on her own. She sent him to live with his grandparents in Slater, Missouri. There, Steve had some stability for a while. His great-uncle Claude, in particular, gave him a sense of routine and hard work, but that peaceful time didn't last. When Steve was around 8 years old, his mother took him back to live with her in Indianapolis. Unfortunately, this meant being introduced to a string of stepfathers, most of whom were abusive, especially the first one. One of these men beat Steve so badly that he once went deaf in one ear. He was often ignored, yelled at, or hit. No one offered him kindness or guidance. Steve began to drift away from home, spending more and more time on the streets. He would later talk about feeling alone and unwanted, even when he was very young. By the time Steve was in his early teens, he was living on the edge. He ran away from home repeatedly, riding freight trains and doing whatever it took to survive. He slept in alleyways, stole to eat, and joined small street gangs. He was already a rebel before he was old enough to understand why. He was arrested more than once for petty crimes, mostly theft and truancy. He wasn't violent, but he was troubled. He didn't like being told what to do and often responded with anger or silence. School was not a place where he could focus or feel safe, so he dropped out. Eventually, the law caught up with him in a more serious way. At 14, Steve was sent to the California Junior Boys Republic in Chino, California. It was a reform school for troubled boys, and it was known for being strict. Many kids didn't make it through. Steve was difficult at first, fighting, running away, and refusing to follow orders. But slowly, something began to change. The school had rules, structure, and discipline. For the first time in his life, Steve had adults who enforced boundaries and expected something from him. At first, he resisted, but after a while, he started to take pride in small things. He worked in the school kitchen, learned how to repair things, and took on responsibilities. He earned the respect of some staff members and even became a role model for other boys. At age 17, looking for a new path, McQueen joined the U.S. Marine Corps in 1947. The decision surprised some people. The Marines were known for being tough and demanding. But Steve needed direction, and the military gave it to him, though not without a struggle. In the beginning, Steve's rebellious nature clashed hard with military life. He was disciplined multiple times for going absent without leave, fighting, and ignoring orders. He was even demoted to private 7 times. But something about the Marines also appealed to him. There were rules, but there was also a sense of purpose and brotherhood. Eventually, Steve began to change. He became a better soldier, more responsible and focused. He learned skills that would help him later in life, including mechanics, physical endurance, and mental toughness. He was even assigned to a special unit responsible for guarding the presidential yacht, which was a sign of growing trust and respect. Steve was honorably discharged in 1950 after 3 years of service. By then, he was 20 years old, stronger, more mature, and ready to find out what came next. Up next, Steve steps into the spotlight and takes his first bold steps into the world of acting and fame. From nobody to an icon, Steve McQueen didn't become famous overnight. His rise to the top took hard work, training, and a lot of tough breaks. Before he became a Hollywood icon, he was just another struggling actor in New York City trying to survive and prove himself in a world that didn't care where he came from. After finishing his time in the Marines, Steve used the GI Bill to attend acting school. He moved to New York and enrolled at the neighborhood Playhouse, one of the top acting schools in the country. There, he studied under Sanford Meisner, a well-known teacher who focused on real, honest performances. Meisner's methods were strict and emotional, but Steve took them seriously. He wanted to be more than just a tough guy. He wanted to act with truth. Even while studying, McQueen had to survive. He took any job he could find to pay rent and stay afloat. He worked as a towel boy in a brothel, a lumberjack in Canada, and an oil rigger in Texas. At one point, he even worked as a carnival barker. These jobs were dirty, dangerous, and often humiliating, but they gave him life experience that later showed up in his acting. He never forgot what it was like to work hard for very little. While in New York, McQueen started getting small parts in stage plays and television. He was determined, but success didn't come easily. Still, his looks, attitude, and presence on camera stood out. He landed bit parts on shows like Goodyear Television Playhouse, Climax, and Studio One. Then in 1958, McQueen got his first big break on television when he landed the lead role in the Western series Wanted, Dead or Alive. He played bounty hunter Josh Randall, a quiet but dangerous man with a sawed-off rifle. The show was a hit. It ran for 3 seasons and turned McQueen into a household name. His calm voice, cool looks, and unpredictable energy made people want to watch him. Hollywood started to take notice. McQueen's first lead role in a movie came in 1958 with The Blob. It was a low-budget science fiction horror film about an alien creature that eats everything in its path. The movie wasn't expected to be much, but it became a surprise success, especially with teenage audiences. McQueen's performance stood out, even though he was playing a basic hero. It didn't make him a star, but it got his foot in the door. The real breakthrough came in 1960 with The Magnificent Seven. McQueen played Vin Tanner, a smooth-talking drifter and gunman. Although it was a supporting role, McQueen stole nearly every scene he was in. Behind the scenes, he clashed with the film's star, Yul Brynner. McQueen used clever tricks to draw attention, like fiddling with his hat or reloading his gun to make sure the camera stayed on him. Brynner noticed, and tensions rose. But audiences didn't care. They loved McQueen's quiet strength and natural charisma. After The Magnificent Seven, McQueen's film career took off. He continued to pick roles that fit his image: loners, outlaws, and rebels. He had a unique presence. He didn't talk too much, but when he did, it mattered. He had a way of showing emotion without saying anything at all. By the late 1960s, Steve McQueen was one of the biggest movie stars in the world. He wasn't just popular, he had power. He carefully chose his roles and often demanded control over how movies were made. He had his own team, his own style, and a reputation for being difficult, but worth it. In 1968, he starred in Bullitt, a police thriller that included a legendary car chase through the streets of San Francisco. McQueen drove the car himself in many of the scenes, flying down hills and tearing through city streets in a Ford Mustang GT. The chase sequence was long, fast, and raw, unlike anything people had seen before. The movie was a box office hit, and the car chase became a blueprint for action films for decades to come. At the height of his career, McQueen was the highest-paid actor in the world, but he didn't play the Hollywood game. He clashed with directors, delayed productions, and demanded rewrites. He refused to sign autographs and hated interviews. Studios feared him, but they also knew he brought audiences to theaters. By the mid-1970s, he began to pull away from the spotlight. He turned down big roles, disappeared for long stretches, and became more private. Fame had brought him everything he thought he wanted, but it didn't fix the parts of him that were still broken: lust, lies, and affairs. In 1956, Steve McQueen met a young actress and dancer named Neely Adams. She was elegant, strong, and calm, very different from the wild energy that McQueen often carried with him. They fell for each other quickly and got married that same year. At the time, McQueen was still an unknown actor, and Neela was the more successful of the two. They had 2 children together, a son, Chad, and a daughter, Terry. Neela supported Steve in every way. She helped him get auditions, manage his money, and stay focused on his career. As his fame grew, Neela stayed by his side. She was quiet, grounded, and loyal, even when things got hard. But life with McQueen was never easy. He had a short temper, a strong need for control, and a constant fear of being betrayed. Neela often had to walk on eggshells to keep the peace. She stayed with him through years of rising fame, demanding film sets and endless temptations from Hollywood. She gave him stability at home while he chased danger and excitement everywhere else. As McQueen's career exploded, so did his ego. He became one of the biggest stars in the world, and he knew it. Fame brought money, attention, and women. Steve was constantly surrounded by co-stars, models, groupies, and admirers. And he didn't resist. He had many affairs, some of them short, others more serious. His infidelity became an open secret. Some of the women he was rumored to have been involved with include Mamie Van Doren, Lauren Hutton, and even some of the extras and crew members from his film sets. McQueen didn't try very hard to hide his affairs, and Neela often knew what was going on. Still, she stayed with him, hoping that things would calm down, or that he would grow out of it. Ironically, while McQueen was cheating, he was also deeply jealous of Neela's past. Before they met, Neela had dated other men, and McQueen couldn't let it go. He often accused her of being unfaithful, even when she wasn't. He wanted to control her completely, emotionally and physically. At times, he would check up on her, follow her, or question her friends. This constant suspicion hurt their marriage and created tension that never fully went away. Neela later said that she loved Steve deeply, but living with him meant dealing with constant storms. He could be sweet and gentle one moment and cold and angry the next. His jealousy, mixed with his affairs and controlling behavior, slowly wore down the trust between them. In 1972, while filming The Getaway, McQueen met actress Ali MacGraw. She was already famous from Love Story and was married to film producer Robert Evans at the time. But the connection between Steve and Ali was immediate. They began an affair during filming, and it quickly became serious. Neela and Steve's marriage was already hanging by a thread, and the affair with MacGraw ended it for good. Steve left Neela and filed for divorce. Not long after, in 1973, he married Ali MacGraw. At first, their relationship seemed passionate and full of excitement. They were Hollywood's power couple, both famous, both beautiful, and both rebellious in their own way. But their marriage was intense and unstable. Steve brought the same controlling behavior into this new relationship. He didn't like Ali working or being away from him. He expected her to stay home, give up her career, and live by his rules. At the same time, he continued to party, use drugs, and cheat. Ali MacGraw later said that she was deeply in love with Steve, but the relationship wore her down. Their arguments were explosive, and the trust between them faded quickly. The passion that brought them together also drove them apart. After 5 years of marriage, they divorced in 1978. After his divorce from MacGraw, Steve McQueen began to pull back from the spotlight. His health was starting to decline, and he became more private. During this time, he met Barbara Minty, a model who was nearly 20 years younger than him. She was quiet, kind, and calm, someone who didn't challenge or argue with him. Barbara and Steve fell into a relationship that was different from the ones he'd had before. It wasn't fiery or dramatic. It was simple and peaceful. For the first time, Steve seemed to want a quiet life. He focused on his hobbies, his spiritual interests, and eventually, his health treatments. In January 1980, Steve married Barbara Minty. By then, he had already been diagnosed with mesothelioma, a rare and aggressive form of cancer. The two of them spent his final months together, traveling, talking, and trying to make peace with everything. Barbara was with him until the very end. She cared for him as his health failed and stayed by his side when he passed away in November 1980. Their time together was short, but it brought Steve a sense of comfort and stability that had been missing from most of his adult life. Drugs, guns, and ego. Steve McQueen had a reputation as the king of cool. He looked fearless on screen, racing cars, jumping fences, and facing danger without blinking. But behind the scenes, he was dealing with deep personal struggles. As his fame grew, so did his need to escape from reality. McQueen used drugs, alcohol, and dangerous habits to cope with pain he didn't know how to fix. The cool image everyone saw was real, but it hit a man who was falling apart inside. Steve McQueen drank heavily, especially when he wasn't filming. Drinking was part of his routine during parties, late nights, and downtime between projects. At first it was social, but over time it became a regular habit. He used alcohol to unwind, but also to numb things he didn't want to feel: stress, guilt, anger, and fear. By the 1970s, McQueen's drug use started to get worse. Cocaine became his drug of choice. He used it often, especially during parties or intense stretches of work. He also smoked marijuana regularly. It wasn't just about having fun. Steve used drugs as a way to calm his nerves and escape the constant pressure he felt from being famous. He had always been high-strung and intense, but now, the drugs helped him manage his anxiety, at least for a while. He didn't go to rehab or therapy. That wasn't something men like him talked about back then. Instead, he chose to keep everything inside and use substances to block out the noise in his head. It worked temporarily, but it also made things worse in the long run. As Steve's drug use continued, something else began to take hold: paranoia. He started to believe that people were watching him, following him, or trying to harm him. He became extremely guarded and suspicious. Even his closest friends noticed that he didn't trust people anymore. At home, McQueen always kept a gun nearby. In fact, he slept with a loaded pistol under his pillow. He installed security systems and hired private guards to protect his property. Some reports say he would sometimes roam his house at night with a gun in his hand, checking locks and windows. He refused to attend most Hollywood parties or award shows. He didn't like being around crowds, and he was convinced that someone might try to hurt him. He turned down invitations to major events and kept his social circle small. People in Hollywood said that McQueen had disappeared from the scene. He didn't care about networking or maintaining connections. He stayed home, surrounded by weapons and distrust. As Steve McQueen's career soared, so did his ego. He became extremely selective about the roles he would accept. He wanted complete control over his projects, from the script to the costumes to how scenes were shot. Directors, producers, and co-stars often found him difficult to work with. He would demand rewrites, refuse to show up on time, or argue about small details. He also started turning down major movie roles, some of which later became legendary. McQueen said no to Apocalypse Now, Dirty Harry, and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. These films went on to become huge hits, and the roles he rejected were played by actors who got praise and awards. But McQueen didn't seem to care. He wanted control more than anything else, even if it meant missing out. Steve McQueen had everything: fame, fortune, and respect. But behind closed doors, he was trapped by fear, addiction, and loneliness. The speed demon. Steve McQueen wasn't just acting when he raced across screens in fast cars and roaring motorcycles. He was living his real passion. While Hollywood made him a star, it was racing that truly made him feel alive. From the earliest days of his success, McQueen was obsessed with speed, engines, and the thrill of competition. He didn't race for show. He raced because he loved it. And in many ways, it meant more to him than anything else. Steve McQueen's love for fast machines started early. As a teenager, he got his first motorcycle, and from the moment he climbed on, he was hooked. Riding gave him freedom, excitement, and a sense of control. As his acting career took off, he used his growing wealth to build one of the most impressive personal collections of cars and bikes in Hollywood. He owned more than 200 motorcycles over the years, including rare and classic models like Triumphs, Harleys, and Husqvarnas. His love for motorcycles wasn't about status, it was about performance and feel. He often rode through the desert for fun, and it wasn't uncommon for him to disappear for hours on his bike. McQueen also collected some of the world's finest sports cars. His garage included Ferraris, Porsches, Jaguars, and other rare vehicles. One of his most famous cars was a 1968 Ford Mustang GT, which he drove in Bullet. Another was the Porsche 917 used in Le Mans. He didn't just keep these cars on display, he drove them hard. He was known to race them on the track and on public roads. He was hands-on with his machines, often working on the engines himself or alongside his trusted mechanics. Cars and bikes weren't just hobbies, they were part of his identity. McQueen didn't just race for fun. He took it seriously and competed in real events against skilled drivers. In 1970, he raced in the 12 Hours of Sebring, a famous endurance race held in Florida. He teamed up with professional driver Peter Revson. Despite having a cast on his left foot from a motorcycle injury, McQueen pushed through and drove long stints during the race. Together, they finished second overall, beating many top-level teams. That same year, McQueen took part in the Baja 1000, a brutal off-road race through the deserts of Mexico. He drove a modified off-road buggy through sand, rocks, and harsh terrain. The race was dangerous and demanding, but McQueen loved every second of it. He didn't mind getting dirty or bruised. He was there to prove himself, and he held his own. But McQueen's most ambitious racing project was the 1971 film Le Mans. This wasn't just a movie, it was his personal dream. He had long admired the 24 Hours of Le Mans, one of the most difficult and respected races in the world. He wanted to capture the real feeling of the race, not just the drama of it. McQueen didn't act much in Le Mans. The focus was on the racing itself. He insisted on using real cars, real footage from the actual Le Mans race, and real drivers. He even wanted to enter a car in the race with himself as one of the drivers, but insurance companies refused to allow it. Racing is dangerous, and Steve McQueen knew that better than most. Over the years, he was involved in several high-speed crashes. On motorcycles, he broke bones and suffered serious bruises. On racetracks, he pushed cars to their limits, sometimes losing control, but none of it slowed him down. In fact, he seemed to enjoy the risk. What made McQueen different from many actors was that he didn't use stunt doubles in action scenes whenever he could avoid it. Whether it was riding through desert trails, leaping over fences, or tearing through city streets, he wanted to do it himself. He felt that audiences could tell when a scene was real, and he took pride in bringing that realism to his films. During the filming of The Great Escape, McQueen did most of his own motorcycle riding. Though a stuntman performed the final jump, McQueen actually rode in several parts of the chase, even doubling for other characters. He was fast, skilled, and fearless on a bike. He often said that racing gave him something acting couldn't. It was raw, physical, and honest. There was no script, no director, and no second take. On the track or the trail, you were either good enough to win or you weren't. That kind of challenge thrilled him, but his love for speed also came with a price. The crashes, injuries, and long hours in the sun and dust took a toll on his body. He didn't always wear proper protection, and he didn't think much about long-term health. Racing made him feel alive, but it also added more wear and tear to a body that was already dealing with addiction and stress. The long goodbye. By the end of the 1970s, Steve McQueen had stepped away from the spotlight. He was still famous and respected, but he wasn't working as much. He had grown tired of Hollywood, and his personal life had gone through major changes. What many didn't know was that behind the scenes, McQueen was also starting to feel unwell. It wasn't a simple illness. What he was facing would turn out to be something far more serious, and something he would battle in his own way, right to the end. In late 1979, McQueen began noticing unusual health problems. He was coughing more than usual. He felt tightness in his chest, along with shortness of breath and pain. He also started losing weight quickly, even though he hadn't changed his diet or lifestyle. At first, it didn't seem like anything major. He thought it might be an infection or maybe a lingering cold. But the symptoms got worse. Doctors eventually ran a series of tests, including X-rays and biopsies. The final diagnosis came in early 1980. Steve McQueen had mesothelioma, a rare and aggressive form of cancer that affects the lining of the lungs and chest cavity. There is no cure for mesothelioma, and most patients live only months after diagnosis. The disease is almost always linked to asbestos exposure. McQueen had never worked directly with asbestos, but he may have come into contact with it in several ways. During his time in the U.S. Marine Corps, asbestos was used widely in ships and military buildings. Later in life, he also wore protective suits during races, some of which were lined with asbestos. Movie sets at the time sometimes used asbestos materials in soundproofing and insulation as well. It's hard to say exactly when or how he was exposed, but the damage had been done. McQueen never had much faith in doctors or hospitals. He had always been independent and suspicious of authority. When he heard that his chances of survival were slim, he didn't respond with quiet acceptance. Instead, he started looking for other answers. He rejected most of the conventional treatments offered to him. He didn't want chemotherapy or major surgery in a U.S. hospital. Instead, he began researching alternative therapies. He became convinced that natural medicine, detox methods, and strict nutrition might work better than what traditional doctors were offering. In 1980, he traveled to Mexico to receive treatment at a controversial clinic. There, he began a series of therapies that included coffee enemas, vitamin injections, a strict vegetarian diet, and laetrile, a chemical extracted from apricot seeds that was being promoted at the time as a cancer treatment, even though it had been banned in the US for being ineffective and possibly dangerous. McQueen believed that these methods might help cleanse his body and slow the cancer. He was desperate for hope and willing to try anything, no matter how unproven. He stayed positive around friends and family, but his condition continued to get worse. Many medical professionals at the time criticized the clinic and the treatments McQueen was receiving. They warned that he was being misled and that he should return home to seek proper care. But McQueen stayed in Mexico, fully committed to his path. By the fall of 1980, McQueen's health had sharply declined. Tumors had spread to his stomach and neck. He was in constant pain and had trouble breathing. Still, he insisted on going forward with one last procedure, an experimental surgery to remove the tumors from his abdominal area and chest. The surgery took place at a small clinic in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, in early November. McQueen's American doctors had warned that his body was too weak for such a procedure and that it would likely cause more harm than good. But Steve pushed ahead. He wanted to fight the cancer his own way, even if it meant taking a big risk. After the surgery, he survived the first night, resting in the hospital. But early in the morning of November 7, 1980, Steve McQueen died in his sleep. The official cause of death was cardiac arrest. He was just 50 years old. Because of the controversy surrounding his treatment and the intense media attention, his body was flown back to the United States in secret. His family wanted privacy and peace. McQueen was later buried in a quiet cemetery in Ventura County, California. His passing shocked fans around the world. Many people didn't even know he had been sick. One day, he had been the king of cool, and the next, he was gone. Steve McQueen's final days were not lived in luxury or ease. They were filled with pain, fear, and a desperate search for answers. But they were also a reflection of who he was, a man who refused to give up control, even when faced with something he couldn't beat. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true Hollywood stories.